In a world where silence has become almost extinct, where the average day is pierced by pings, posts, and a flood of endless news, there lies a mountain most people will never visit. It has no social media account, no tourist buses rolling in, no flashy welcome signs. Yet for over 1,000 years, this place has held on to something most of us lost long ago: a single-minded pursuit of God. This is Mount Athos. Tucked away on a narrow peninsula in northern Greece, Mount Athos is often called the Holy Mountain. But its holiness isn't found in altitude. It's found in attitude, in the radical lives of men who walk away from everything we chase to chase after only one thing: the presence of God. There are no women allowed on Mount Athos, no parties, no selfies, no outside distractions, not because these monks look down on the world, but because they're trying to look up. The tradition goes that the Virgin Mary herself once landed on these shores, blessed the land, and claimed it as her spiritual garden. Since then, no woman has ever set foot on the mountain. It's not about exclusion, it's about consecration. Today, 20 monasteries still operate on the mountain. They are not ruins, not museums. They are living, breathing altars of prayer. Inside their walls, men who have renounced careers, wealth, and even their own last names rise long before the sun, sometimes as early as 3 a.m., to begin their day not with a phone check, but with a liturgy. They chant, they read, they kneel. The world hurries, they slow down. The world builds brands, they build altars. Their rhythm follows an ancient beat, one you won't find in corporate calendars or streaming schedules. And while you and I are scrolling through apps or sipping coffee half awake, these monks are lifting up songs that echo centuries into the past. Why do they do it? Because Jesus once said, "Whoever of you does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple." Luke 14:33. Most of us read that verse and think metaphor. They read it and said yes. One of the most striking features of Mount Athos is its stubborn refusal to change. But maybe that's not a weakness, it's a strength. While the world constantly reinvents itself, Mount Athos remembers who it is. While society searches for identity, Athos holds on to purpose. While we curate our image, the monks bow their heads. And perhaps that's the paradox that hits so deeply. In a culture obsessed with being seen, these men disappear. They aren't running away from the world. They're running toward eternity. Even Hollywood couldn't ignore it. Before Mel Gibson directed The Passion of the Christ, he quietly made a pilgrimage to Mount Athos. No red carpets, no press releases, just a man burdened by life, looking for something real. Decades later, he returned, not as a celebrity, but again as a seeker. Why? Because even for someone who's been to the top of the world, there's something higher than fame. There's something about this mountain that confronts your soul. The silence doesn't entertain, it convicts. You realize just how noisy your heart has become, how starved your soul is for stillness, and that's when you understand. Mount Athos doesn't just hide from the world, it holds it up in prayer. If your soul has ever longed for more than noise, more than applause, more than success, then Mount Athos whispers something your heart already knows. There's another way, a quieter way, a way that doesn't ask to be seen, because it's already being seen by heaven. To understand Mount Athos today, you have to go back, not just centuries, but millennia. While the modern world races ahead, Athos walks backward into sacred memory. This isn't nostalgia, it's restoration, a return to something the world forgot. The mountain first appears in ancient Greek texts as early as the 5th century BC. Back then, it was known more for myth than monasticism. Legends told of Poseidon hurling mountains in battle. But as the tides of history shifted and Christianity began to rise, Athos was reborn, not as a battleground of gods, but as a sanctuary of saints. By the 4th century AD, something remarkable began to happen. Men left the cities, not to escape taxes or politics, but to escape themselves. They weren't running from responsibility, they were running to discipline. These were the Desert Fathers, the early Christian ascetics, inspired by the example of Christ, who withdrew into the wilderness to pray and fast. To them, solitude was not punishment, it was preparation. Mount Athos became one of their final refuges. Caves became chapels. Forests became corridors of worship. The wind itself seemed to carry scripture. They weren't building empires. They were emptying themselves. Then in the year 963 AD, a spiritual fire was lit that would never be extinguished. A man named Saint Athanasius the Athonite, a mystic and monk driven by divine fervor, established the first major monastery on the mountain, the Great Lavra. From that single flame, a wildfire of spiritual devotion spread. Other monasteries followed, each a stronghold of prayer, built not by ambition, but by surrender. This was no accident. Kings, emperors, and church leaders throughout Byzantium and later Orthodox lands recognized Athos as something worth protecting. They offered gifts, funding, even armies. But the monks didn't come for gold. They came for God. And so while kingdoms fell and revolutions raged, while plagues emptied cities and wars erased borders, Mount Athos stood, not because of its stone, but because of its spirit, because of men who chose prayer over politics, fasting over feasting, faith over fear. At its peak, over 20,000 monks lived on the peninsula. Today, that number has dwindled to around 1,000, but their impact hasn't lessened. Like spiritual embers glowing in the ashes of a world that's forgotten how to kneel, they carry the fire still. Some monasteries cling to cliffs like divine fortresses. Inside, relics are kept, not as museum pieces, but as living testimonies. Ancient icons, handwritten gospels, and yes, even the bones of saints are preserved. Not out of superstition, but reverence. These are reminders that holiness isn't an idea. It's a life lived, a cross carried. And what might be most humbling is this. Athos doesn't claim to be perfect. These monks are not spiritual celebrities. They are sinners, saved by grace, who have chosen to live on their knees rather than on platforms. Their battles are not on Twitter. They are in the secret places of the soul. One visitor described the silence of Athos as almost unbearable. That's because it doesn't just surround you, it enters you. It strips away all the external noise until you're face to face with your own inner poverty. And in that moment you realize silence is not emptiness. It's invitation, an invitation to finally hear the voice of God. Even the architecture of the monasteries testifies to this mindset. There are no performance stages, no bright lights, no modern instruments, just voices, untrained, ancient, sometimes cracked and trembling, chanting prayers that haven't changed in centuries. Many of those chants repeat just one line, "Lord, have mercy." That simple phrase becomes their song, their cry, their offering, and perhaps that's why it's so powerful. Because it reminds us that prayer doesn't begin with polished words, but with desperation, with humility, with surrender. And in a world growing more proud, more performative, more self-sufficient, Mount Athos is a stubborn, beautiful refusal. A refusal to let go of awe. A refusal to dilute the gospel. A refusal to move on from God. It's tempting to dismiss Mount Athos as irrelevant, a relic of a simpler time. But that's where we're wrong. Athos isn't stuck in the past. It's anchored in eternity. And while we chase relevance, maybe we've lost reverence. So the real question is not, what does Mount Athos offer the world? The real question is, what does the world lose without Mount Athos? Because in its silence, we rediscover stillness. In its simplicity, we rediscover sincerity. And in its centuries-old prayers, we hear something louder than any modern trend. A call to return, to repent, to remember. To the untrained eye, Mount Athos looks like a retreat from the world. Quiet chapels, robed monks, ancient hymns echoing in candlelight. There's no obvious battle here, but to those who understand the spiritual life, it's clear. This mountain is a war zone, not a war of bombs or politics, but of the soul. In Ephesians 6:12, Paul reminds us that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. On Mount Athos, that verse is not a metaphor, it's a job description. The monks are not passive, they are watchmen, warriors of intercession. Every prayer is a sword, every fast is a strike against darkness. Their silence? That's not withdrawal, it's resistance. What makes this battle even more astonishing is that it's completely hidden from view. The world rarely sees it, and that's the point. On Athos, glory is not earned through visibility, but through faithfulness. Take, for example, the monk whose job it is to wake before dawn every day to light candles and prepare the chapel for worship. He may never write a book or preach to millions, but in the heavenly record, his offering of unseen faithfulness may shine brighter than any sermon ever spoken. Their fasting is another form of warfare. It's not about self-harm or legalism, it's about freedom. Freedom from craving, freedom from control, freedom from the constant pull of the flesh. When a monk denies himself food or sleep, he's declaring to his own body, "You are not in charge." And in doing so, he makes room for the Spirit to lead. One might ask, why does this matter to the rest of us? Why should the prayers of 1,000 monks hidden in Greek mountains make a difference to our lives today? James 5:16 gives us a clue. The prayer of a righteous man is powerful and effective. What if the prayers of these monks are sustaining more than just themselves? What if they're holding up the very world that's trying to tear itself apart? There's an old saying among Orthodox Christians, if the prayer on Athos ever ceases, the world will end. Is that just poetic? Maybe, but maybe it's more. Maybe those forgotten voices in the dark, lifting up their cries at 3 a.m. Each are pleading for your child, your city, your broken heart, your forgotten church. It's humbling to think that while we debate theology online, monks are on their knees praying for us. While influencers are curating their next brand move, Athonite elders are lifting their hands to heaven for the sick, the addicted, the lost. And here's the part that humbles me most. They don't even know our names. They just know that the world is in pain, and they refuse to be silent about it. There's a kind of holy anonymity here that challenges everything about our culture. We're obsessed with recognition, with credit, with going viral. But on Mount Athos, the goal is to disappear so completely into Christ that there's nothing left but Him. We can learn from that. In fact, Mel Gibson, who knows a thing or two about worldly recognition, seemed to realize this. When he made his pilgrimage to Athos, he didn't bring cameras. He didn't post about it. He simply went, seeking mercy, seeking silence, seeking God. And that's the irony. The more he withdrew, the more he found what matters. Because Mount Athos doesn't offer entertainment. It offers encounter. It's a reminder that the most powerful moments in our faith won't happen on stages or live streams. They'll happen when we turn off the noise, humble ourselves, and listen. I recently read the story of a young man who visited the mountain after years of spiritual burnout. He was angry, skeptical, ready to walk away from the church entirely. But something happened on Athos. Not a vision, not a miracle, just a silence that undid him. He later said, "For the first time in years, I felt like God was listening, and I had nothing left to say except, 'Lord, have mercy.'" And maybe that's the beginning of true transformation, not when we shout, but when we surrender. Mount Athos teaches us this every day. And in a world that exalts pride, noise, and speed, these monks walk the opposite path. Humility, silence, stillness, not because it's easy, but because it's holy. So maybe the next time you feel overwhelmed by the chaos of life, you can remember this truth. There is a mountain, there are men praying, and they're praying for you, even if you never meet. That in itself is a miracle. Mount Athos isn't a relic, it's a rebuke, a living witness that holiness is possible, that prayer is powerful, and that faith, when stripped of all its modern comforts, still burns just as brightly as it did 1,000 years ago. And maybe that's the challenge it offers us. You don't need to move to a monastery, but you do need to make space for silence, for God, for the kind of prayer that reshapes you from the inside out. Because when all the noise has faded and every kingdom falls, what will remain are those who knew Him. Let's be among them. If this message stirred something in you, don't let it end here. Like the video, subscribe, share it with someone whose heart is weary, and above all, remember, God is still speaking if we are still enough to listen.